I'll go share my screen here. All right. So, uh, starting off with a big question, what is GitOps? What isn't GitOps? Um, so last year, if you were around some of these community calls, you may have seen me demo uh, a, a progressive stages of demos relating to Radius plus GitOps integration. And this demo today hopefully should tie it all together. So I want to kind of demo what the end-to-end user experience of Radius plus Flux is gonna look like as of the release upcoming in 2 or 3 weeks. So first, I want to do some context setting for those of you that may not be that's familiar with GitOps as other folks on the call. So GitOps is described as many things. In this case, it's an operational framework that takes DevOps best practices used for application development, for example, using Git repos for version control, collaboration, and CI/CD, and applies them to infrastructure automation. And so if you know anything about Radius, you know that infrastructure automation and collaboration are pretty much everything we do. It's the most important thing to us. So GitOps conceptually fits very well with what we try to do at Radius, and I'll show you how. So first, I want to start with some specifics about GitOps on Kubernetes, and there's a couple big name projects that work on Kubernetes to enable this GitOps flow. One of which that you probably heard of is Flux, and this is what we started with based on interest from the community. Of course, there's also Argo CD, which we also have plans to integrate with, and if that's interesting to you, please do go on to our roadmap or our issues and upvote these issues. I'm sure they're sitting around. So yeah, so Flux, you can see here in the first page of the documentation, Flux works well with all of these Kubernetes tools that everyone knows and loves, Helm, Istio, Grafana, so on and so forth, right? So what if Flux also works well with Radius? So you could use Flux to set up your repo automation, right? It would be responsible for handling changes to your Git repositories, and Radius could take over the work from there to handle the deployment and configuration of your application's infrastructure. So that's exactly what I'm going to demo today. Spoiler alert. And I'm going to start with this app here that's in our docs. It's a pretty simple app, but I'm going to put the GitOps twist on it. So in this sample right today, there's like a front-end container, a backend container, and some backend data store. So today with Radius, what the docs have you do is something like this, right? You need to go in and initialize Radius. You have your Radius initialized. You create your bicep file. You run rad deploy, and so on and so forth, right? So this is something everyone that's done Radius is pretty familiar with. But I'm going to show that with the new changes to Flux, you can take care of this deployment and redeployment and configuration all within Git automations. So let's do it. So here I have, as mentioned, like an example of this tutorial app. So it has the same structure. It has a it has a resource container, which is just the sample, and it has a backing data store, in this case Redis, not MongoDB. So pretty standard Radius application, very useful for a whole lot of extended use cases. What I also have is a Kubernetes cluster. So on this Kubernetes cluster, which you can imagine that this cluster gets set up somehow by either your infrastructure operator or in a CI/CD way or some sort of code space, anything like that. In my case, I have like a pretty simple, create a con cluster, install Flux, install Radius. Pretty simple stuff. And you can imagine that this all gets automated somehow using your existing CI/CD or building new stuff like Flux. You can have built everything into the repos. So anyway, back to our cluster. So what we have is what we expected. Radius, just Flux stuff here, right here with the source controller, and that's basically it. So on the Radius side, we have an environment and we have a recipe, which is just the Redis cache recipe, right? So these are infrastructure operator concerns, and the infrastructure operator is responsible for basically providing to your application developers an environment that they can work on based on all the best practices and everything in the organization, so that application developers, of course, don't have to worry about these kinds of things. So yeah, so that's what we've got, and I'm going to show that we can actually not rad deploy this. We can instead add it to our Git repo, right? So imagine we have a Git repository sitting in GitHub. We've added and committed all of this stuff, which I've already done. And let's go to that Git repo. So this is just a public Git repository I have sitting around with our app definition that we just saw, along with some bicep parameters specifying the replicas, and a configuration for Radius. I mean, this is just like a couple things like, hey, here's my app, here's my parameters, right? So now let's go back to our cluster and let's actually tell Flux and tell Radius what we want to do. So in this case, we're going to create a git source. This is a common Flux command to create a new pointer to a Git repository. In this case, exactly the one I just showed on the dev branch, and that's where we were before. We're just, you can organize this however you want. You can make them subfolders, you can make them different branches, different repos, whatever works for you. And so now that we've created this on the cluster, you can see these apps, or the Radius apps, start to actually spin up here. So in that bicep file that we declared, we have the demo, container, and then we have this DB, which is a Redis cache, which for the dev configuration is just spinning up a Redis container on the cluster. So works as expected, and we can see that Radius actually also has picked up this configuration from Flux to point to this repo, which contains bicep files, and actually deploys those bicep files. And not only deploys, but also keeps them up to date. But I'll show that in just a second. So let's first go into our RADApp graph and show exactly what we've got going on here. We can see that we have our demo container and we have our Redis cache database. Awesome. So that seemed to work just fine. And so one of the principles of GitOps is not only the ability to keep something deployed onto your cluster, it's also to handle updates, deletions, and pretty much any sort of changes that you need to see in your application. So that's the benefit of these GitOps technologies. Is the idea is you want to be able to say, whatever's in this Git repository, that's what I want to see on my cluster. And so let me demo that. In this tutorial, we basically got here, right? We got to this app, and then we added a database and the connection to it. Next in the tutorial, there's this backend container. So I'm going to show that using Radius plus Flux, you can change all of these things, commit, and your application gets updated just as if you had deployed it for the first time. So let's copy this, and we can see from the diff that we've just added a connection to the backend and then a new backend container. So let's commit all of this stuff, and we will sit on the cluster here and get pods. We'll sit on the cluster and wait for this to reconcile really quick while I talk about kind of what's going on here. So watch. There we go. All right. So what we want to see is we want to see eventually that Flux picks up these changes from our Git source, which we declared above, and reapplies them onto the cluster. Of course, Flux doesn't really know anything about Bicep or Radius out of the box, and so that's where we've come in and built some, well, the Flux controller to handle these kinds of situations. So that's basically what this first class support for Flux actually looks like. Is we've tapped into Flux to pick up these notifications and changes, and then deploy them to Radius and keep them reconciled as necessary. So my timing has been impeccable, of course, and we end up with a bunch of changes, which you can see here. This is what we wanted to see, right? We wanted to see a new pod running called backends, and we check the radapp graph. We can see exactly what happened here. We got a new container and our new connection to our demo container. So you can imagine from this point that there's pretty much anything you can do using these two technologies together, right? So this is like a dev environment, right? I mean, pretty simple stuff. You can do all of your application developer duties, so on and so forth, builds your applications, and then commit them to a Git repository. And from there, you can imagine that, you know, an SRE or some sort of DevOps team or however you have it configured in your organization can kind of take it from there. So let me switch over real quick to something more similar to a production application or a production environment. So let's switch my workspace over to, I think I called it AKS. I did. Okay. And then let's do a rad app graph. Okay, so in this AKS cluster is pretty much the same exact app.bicep, and let's go over to prod instead of dev. So pretty much the same app.bicep, except here in the replicas in this branch by default, we've configured 3 replicas, and we've configured the same database, but if you know anything about recipes, you understand that whatever your infrastructure operator or you set on your environment is going to be the recipe that actually gets deployed. And that's what we can see here in our production environment is we have a Microsoft Redis, an Azure Redis cache instead of a containerized Redis cache. And we have, if we switch our Kubernetes context over to this guy, we can see that here we are. We have 3 of those containers scaled. And so you can imagine that if you're an SRE or DevOps or application developer maintaining your app, you can change you can expose these kinds of configurations and change these as much as you want. So imagine we wanted to scale to 5 replicas. All you have to do is commit this to your repo where your production cluster is pointing, and you will get your intended specification. So yeah, that's it for my demo. So thanks everyone for listening in and being along for the ride on the GitOps thing. I know it's an area that a lot of people are really interested in, including myself. So I'm happy to see that there's been a lot of interest here. And so if you have any questions, feature requests, concerns, let me know, or let us know, I guess. We'll all be here. Thank you.